It'll just be everyone together.
We like it from.
There it is. Okay, so I'm going to shut this door and then we'll come. I got it. Wonderful. I just sort of start recording. Well, yeah, sure.
I'm sure some more people will join online.
Well, as they join, they can.
And I can also send the video through to people.
Okay. All right, I think we'll start, everyone. Thank you for coming this morning. Welcome, and it's very nice to be here on December of this year. Very exciting that we've made it through to December, which is lovely, the 2nd of December. So, and just for the matters of organisation, for the people in the room, the toilets are around the corner, and we have pastries and tea and coffee for those present here. And welcome everyone online. Thank you very much for coming in. You can turn your cameras on, keep your cameras on, but happy for Kim is going to do the chat channel. So if you have any questions at any time, please post them into the chat. And we'd really like to make this a very open session. So the more conversation we can have, the better it will be. Now, before I actually start, I'd like to do the welcome to country and acknowledge the spirit animals, lands and waterways of the land that we're on today, the Eun-Ji, and pay our respects to the Yugara and Turrbal peoples. What we're going to do today is really focus on AR, VR and XR technologies. And we have two very special guests with us from the Swiss Federal University for Vocational Education and Training, and that is Chiara and Vito, and a team of researchers that we've been working on a project together also in AI, and that is myself, Kim and Amy. So the five of us today will be presenting. So we thought to make this more interactive and have conversations flowing, we're only going to present 6 minutes each. So each of us will present in order topics around AI and VR and XR, because once we've done that presentation, we'd really like to get your feedback on how we work from these sort of type of research topics, moving them into practical applications in schooling. So the biggest, most important thing, morning Ian, come and join us, is this idea of moving from research to practice. And so the more discussion we have, the more open we are about that and thinking about those things, I think it would make more sense than just working in that sort of more research space. So we're going to do 6-minute presentations. Then for the next 30 minutes, we're going to actually do this idea of strategies, and then we're going to share together, and then we'll close. So it only goes for an hour and a half. So hopefully we'll get through all the different topics today and make it a really interactive session. Now, before I start, are there any questions for the people in the room or the people online? Any questions at all? Wonderful. Okay, well, we'll start. Chiara, it's over to you about your generative AI study. And welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you too for inviting us. I'm Chiara, and today I will present you our result of the study that we conduct investigating the use of generative AI by upper secondary school students. So there are some studies conducted in higher education about how students use generative AI. However, there is a lack of study investigating how upper secondary students are using generative AI. So for this reason, we conduct this study in Switzerland in 15 Swiss upper secondary schools. And the study was conducted in between November 2023 and March 2024. We developed a survey, and we share the survey online, and we collected data from 2,357 students in Switzerland. And I'm going to present you the results. So overall, 87% of students reported to use generative AI software, like, for example, ChatGPT, DALL-E, DeepL, Bing Chat, etc. And then we also ask for what kind of activities the students are using generative AI. And the results shows that students use generative AI software mostly for finding an answer or an explanation. So for getting answer. And then they also use generative AI for summarizing content, translating a text, revising, improving a text, and writing a text. So they use generative AI for working with text and for writing. And then we also ask students in which subject do you use generative AI? And the results show that students mostly use generative AI for learning a second language, followed by social science, first language. And so it seems that students mostly use generative AI for humanities subjects. Instead, the use of generative AI in STEM subjects is not highly reported. So if they don't use generative AI for learning maths or computer science. Then we also investigate gender differences and overall generative AI use. And what we found is that there is a significant difference between female and male students, and male students reported to use generative AI more frequently than female. Then we also found differences in the use of AI for cheating. So we asked students if they are using generative AI software for doing homework and to reduce the effort put in doing school-relating tasks. And it seems that main students use most frequently generative AI for this purpose. And then we also try to assess the perceived skills in using generative AI softwares, and male reported a higher competence and also a higher positive attitude. So in general, it seems that male students use generative AI more frequently, and also they have a more positive attitude toward generative AI than female. So I think that it's interesting to see this difference. Then we also investigate a concern related to generative AI. So we ask students if they perceive a positive or negative impact of generative AI on different domains. And you can see here that students perceive a negative impact on privacy, social relationship, and safety. But they perceive a positive impact of generative AI on education, health, and work. So it seems that students have a positive attitude toward generative AI when it is used in education, in health, and in work sector. So this is a general overview. We should still investigate what does it mean, because, for example, they perceive this positive attitude, this positive impact in education because they can use generative AI to reduce the workload and effort they put in school and in learning. And thank you very much. I hope that these results could be interesting for you.
Yeah. Before we move on, are there any just quick questions that anyone would like to ask of that study?
Do you have any insights as to why health was a positive response?
No, it's possible. So that students in healthcare sector, maybe they see the potential of generative AI in their sector, for example, for screening or for diagnosis. So, but unfortunately, we didn't investigate very deeply what does it mean. But
Thank you.
Or what those students are studying at the time.
Yeah.
It's interesting the heaviness of the negative compared to the less positive. Like it seems to be more in the negative than it is in the positive.
Like, have you seen that? Like, yeah.
So it seems to be that the focus is quite, their own privacy, social relationships, safety is weighing heavier on them than the positive effects in regard to their education, health, and work.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I'm just making up.
I think these are very interesting findings in the current, our national debates about ban for social media for 16, over 16 years old. And, I mean, although this is about AI,
It's very interesting.
they are
How the relationship
yes.
impact. Yeah.
Yeah. Because most of your like WhatsApp and your
Yes.
social media has all AI generation
Yes,
support
yes.
underlying it now. The reason why I'm just throwing to questions, we've probably got a little bit more time, I'm thinking. So that's why I thought I'd sort of open the questions after each of our presentations. Are there any other questions?
I just want to make a comment. I think the results are really interesting from the perspective of, how teachers need to respond or how the school system needs to respond.
Yeah, especially on this one, Sarojini.
Yeah.
Like it was language 2 was the highest, so your second language, and it's all word-based, as you were saying, which is quite interesting because Kim's very mathematical, so in your mathematical research domain, that generative AI seems to be sitting more in the humanities.
Yeah, well, it's the unreliability, I suppose, of things like ChatGPT or I mean, you have already Wolfram, who's providing calculators for those kinds of problem solving. But when you jump to the large language models, there's less reliability in the responses. I can ask Claude, ChatGPT, and Copilot the same question, and there'll be differences in the responses, conceptual differences. Yeah. So it's, but more maybe the primary sector teachers or teachers out of field in secondary using ChatGPT to say, how do I explain this to a 13-year-old or a 15-year-old, or, using that kind of approach as opposed to solving mathematical problems and the language of mathematics, the symbolic language.
So it might be like, I found that those tools are good, but at the end of the day, the person needs to know the stuff, because sometimes you get very odd kinds of responses from AI. If you didn't know your stuff and you believed it, you'd go with it.
Yeah, if you're a non-mathematics
Yes.
graduate
Yeah.
and you don't know if that's right or wrong, you're just
Totally.
putting your trust in it.
Yeah, there's a lot of research coming around in regard to the expertise, the level of expertise you actually need to be using these sort of type of programs because of this factor. So it's not complete expertise. This is, I'm just saying, kind of what they're saying at the moment. There's nothing set in stone, but it's that idea that you need a certain level to make a judgment. But it's being critical about what the actual material's coming out at you. So it's more about being critical and having some level of expertise to actually be able to interpret what, to make the judgment on, is it false, is it true, to seek more information and have the varying sources. So,
And that could be the difficulties in STEM, because if you're a teacher of mathematics or science, but you're not a STEM professional, you don't have that level of understanding of what does an agricultural scientist do or an ecologist, or, so you might miss those opportunities.
I think it's interesting too that we're talking about our students receive AI or engage with AI from a content perspective in maths, in sciences and maths versus humanities. In time, I think that the maths teachers could also engage with AI in terms of using it to make mathematics more engaging for the students, quite apart from the content and the accuracy of the content. Just as other teachers could use AI for engaging students.
Yeah, I don't mean to hijack that conversation, but the work of Dan Meyer, especially in the States, focuses on the culture in the mathematics classroom. So there's a lot of work, yes, on using the AI to engage, authentic, past creation, but also how can I use it to build culture in my classroom? Yeah,
That's right.
norms, socio-mathematical norms.
And that sort of thing traditionally takes longer to get traction in any classroom. than the strictly the content type of response.
So it gives you the conversation starter or the
Correct.
ability to bring people into the conversation in a way that they feel a little bit maybe more empowered because they're doing something and they're contributing. Do you know what I mean? So it creates the culture of the conversation.
That's right. You could use AI, for example, in a mathematics classroom to just as a simple idea, you could use it to create real-world examples, to identify real-world examples of application of what we're studying in mathematics today, for example, and then only for a short time, and then move into the didactic teaching and the problem solving, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm working with a bunch of grade 9 experts at the moment over in Fiji, and that's exactly what they're doing. So they have 20 years secondary math experience, and they're shifting to a student-centered curriculum, and it's using ChatGPT. What would be an authentic real-life application of this? You know, how am I going to teach linear equations in a meaningful way? Yeah.
There is an online question. Are there any open-ended questions and or provisions of other options to those questions in your survey?
And you mean in the concern about the concern? So it was not an open-ended, but it was a closed question. So we asked in these 8 domains so how they perceive the impact. So it was not an open-ended. So we don't have a
No more.
No
There
more.
was no open-ended. Any other questions online? No.
Okay, can I ask one more
Yeah.
question? I was wondering if you could clarify, you mentioned cheating, and then in the next sentence you said homework. And sometimes homework has a different conception in different countries. And I was just wondering what you meant by cheating.
So we developed this cheating with generative AI scale. It's 4-item scale, and the items assess, for example, if you are using generative AI for doing homework, so for asking to resolve the problem, the task, and related activities. Or, for example, another item was I used generative AI asking to solve a problem, and I copy the solution without modifying the solution. So it was.
So if they said, could you write in Spanish how I would ask to da 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 da, and if they just got the answer and put it in, that was cheating?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if they were doing it for a homework task and they asked Copilot for assistance, but they adjusted it, that was still considered cheating?
No, it is not considered cheating. It's just, reduce the effort you put into your homework, but means copy and paste from an example from ChatGPT. So without revising the sentence itself.
And Sharon, in that respect, do you think it's changed much? Because those ideas around copy paste have been around for a while, you know, in regard to, we can Google it, So do you think much has changed because of generative AI? In what way?
Copy and paste from Wiki or Google. So it's not the same, the copy and paste from ChatGPT, because ChatGPT elaborates sentences more, and it creates sentences that could be produced by students. So I think that the format of the sentence is different. So when you copy from Wikipedia or Google, you have to, I think you have to a bit to restructure the sentence. So you can take the information, but you have to write and create a sentence. Instead, when you use ChatGPT creates a sentence for you, so you don't have to, I think, revise much more. So.
And you could ask it to make it sound like me, and I am this person, so please make it sound like that. Vito, have you got any?
Yeah, just a small update for new AI tools for maths. It was considered not really reliable. That maybe one of the reasons why it was used only the 9%. And now it changed a lot because GPT-01 arrived. I don't know if you ever used it, and they try to compare it with bachelor student, master student, and then with PhD student, and defeated PhD student in physics, in maths, in biology. So it's becoming more and more accurate. And furthermore, for the style, Claude just introduced a new feature that it is called create your own style. And you can provide your essay or your papers, and then it will try to copy the way in which you write and report it inside your text when it is correcting or revising your text. It was just a small.
Yeah, but that wouldn't be surprising because book authors have said, hey, someone's taken all my texts and written a book as though I'm the author, using AI. So sort of not surprising that that's already happening. But now people are just going, I can do it for my own writing. Awesome. What do you think, Amy? Did you want to comment on STEM?
No, not necessarily. Okay. Chiara, thank you so much for presenting that really interesting, very topical conversation that we've just had. So I'll move to my, well, actually ours. This was myself, Kim and Amy. We did some research around teachers' pedagogical beliefs for generative AI, and it has been published in TPE, which we're very excited about just recently, so it's available online. But basically, it looks at secondary school teachers and leaders. So let me just start with the question that we literally had to guide this particular piece of work. And that question is, how are relationships between teachers' pedagogical beliefs about risk, productivity and transformation for generative AI approaches evidenced through a discipline-specific lens? So to let me explain that, what we were seeing when we were looking at the context for the study was everyone was talking about risk and productivity. There was so much research so far about the risk of using generative AI, or you could make lesson plans really fast, or you can do this sort of type of work. So the productivity of it. But there was very little research demonstrating how to transform, how to actually use generative AI as a pedagogical tool effectively. So what we looked at is to really understand that you actually have to bring them together. You can't divorce them. So we wanted to look at that relationship between how teachers were thinking about risk, productivity with and considering how they might be changing how they teach because of generative AI. So that was the context of the study, and that's why we did the study. So we used the theoretical framework. So to try to understand this, we had to unpack it in a way. And we looked at, because the question again looked at pedagogical beliefs, we looked at 3 different roles technology plays. So that is to supplement, so kind of add on, you just use it in the same kinds of ways, to actually enrich, to make your lessons, like Ian, you were just talking about mathematics and how it was the conversation starter. So that's an example of enrich, or actually totally transform the way that they were doing their teaching and learning in classrooms. But we also had to look at the administrative role. So that was the productivity. And then we had to look at what's called the subversive role, which is the risk. So we were trying to bring all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 together, and also in the context of my discipline. If I was a maths teacher, if I was a history teacher, if I was an English teacher, if I was an arts teacher, how do these actually come together? Because it's influenced by my actual subject knowledge, my knowledge of my domain. So you can't divorce that. And the reasoning that was linked to that, that discipline. So we asked 10 discipline leaders, the heads of department. So in Australia, we actually have like a head of maths, a head of science, a head of arts in school. So we asked those people because they really led what was happening within their faculties. Okay. Now,
it was interview based, so it's very qualitative, and each teacher was considered a case because we wanted to look at their work. We couldn't thematically analyse it because we weren't interested across. We wanted to go, what did the maths teacher say? What did the history teacher say? Yeah. So we kept it as a case, and we were really looking at those different pedagogical beliefs and the role that the generative AI would take. So we created a code book. And interestingly, because we wanted to look at the interrelationships, we created diagrams and studies and summaries. So of what the maths teacher, history teacher did. I'll share one with you. And this is Sharon. She was the visual arts teacher. Now in the paper, it goes into a lot more detail, but you can see here we were trying to look at with the arrows what was actually happening here, because what was guiding or driving the way that they were considering generative AI, were they considering it heavily in the subversive role, so that would affect therefore how they would teach with it, or would they be looking more to transform and change? So I'm just going to read you the summary, and you'll see as you actually move your eyes through the diagram what this kind of means. So Sharon is the visual arts teacher, and because of the arts discipline, she really focuses on originality and creativity. That's her core drivers. This is what I really want. And she was really about getting the students to do it themselves. So it had to be their authentic work. So she was stressing that a lot. Now, because of that, it went straight to the subversive role. As you can see, because it was heavily, I want them to do it themselves. Therefore, how much is being taken away by using a particular program? I need to think. I need for students to authenticity in their work. So because of that heightened subversive role that she was considering, she then moved into different approaches in how she used generative AI. So supplementary role. So what she actually asked the students to do was to control the use of generative AI so that they could not produce the dominant language approach she described seeks to control the use of generative AI so that cannot produce the creative work but is more part of the process. So she didn't want the generative AI to do the work. She wanted the students to do the work because of the heaviness of the subversive role. So in order to do this, she required the students to complete the creative work with pen and paper first, and then use the AI for the product at the end. So the process that she did very much was the supplementary use of generative AI because of the heaviness of the subversive role. However, she does also explain that students may refine, edit and create through this production process. So that's that enriched role. Sharon also limits AI use to part of a larger task such as character creation. So so when she described this, she described that the students were creating different characters. So instead of just doing the whole character, it was kind of like the brainstorm of the character was first. She wouldn't ask the students to use generative AI through the whole creation process. So she bounded it to a certain part of the actual learning. So what this basically shows is that the whole reasoning behind this is the fact that if we want teachers to transform, we have to understand what's coming before it, what's actually coming in regard to how they position and why they position in their discipline context the actual use of generative AI. So it's not just change the way you're teaching, you actually have to unpack what comes behind the actual thinking and the reasoning why they're actually doing it in that way. So basically for this particular study, we were trying to map it in a way so that we could understand that relationship.
So the paper's available now, and then we think it's a fantastic paper, of course. But what it actually presents is that multi-dimensional view. Instead of just you need to transform, it's got to do with risk. We're actually looking at the relationship between it, which I think is really important. In the paper, we talk about there's kind of was a continuum, different ways that teachers were using depending on their discipline. So one of the ways was no action at all, wouldn't use it. The next way was limit it, so bound it to task. The next was embed in a task. The next one was looking for change, just looking to how I might change the way I'm teaching with it. And the other one was testing new ways, actually with the students. So we're starting to do this transformation, but at the moment it depends on how much risk and how much the way they think about productivity. Now, productivity, when we're looking at through the data, means two different things. Productivity and teacher productivity was I'll do the lesson plan. So often you'll see and you'll hear teachers talk about productivity to say, I'm using it, but I'm using it out of the classroom for lesson plans. I'm not even bringing in my classroom. So they're high risk, high productivity, but I'm not even going to start in my classroom yet. So that's what you're seeing in the literature. Lots of talk about outside classroom work and productivity. The key here is student productivity, because students can do the piece of assessment straight away. So the assessment task might be character creation, done, 5 minutes over, what do we do now? So the high levels of student, if you shift to student productivity, how's that going to look? What does that mean? So these three keys that we're looking at, the relationship between the three keys are so interesting. And that's me. Any questions? So please read the paper, but yeah, it's really about the relationships, trying to get behind the scenes. Yeah. Okay, so we'll move to Kim.
Excellent. Well, another output of that work, the series of infographics. So you can see 4 that are there. We actually worked with 10 subject discipline school leaders. I'll call them teacher school leaders, because although they were heads of department or heads of school, they were also teachers in the classroom, so teacher subject leaders. And so each of us as researcher acted as a critical friend with that subject leader. We had 3 or 4 with each. And through co-design, we had ongoing discussions that were recorded and transcribed, and these conversations happened online, depending on the needs, or face-to-face, depending on the needs of the teacher and the researcher. But each subject leader and critical friend pair explored and co-designed ways to implement generative AI in that subject leader's classroom that was purposeful to them, as you say, and discipline specific. So it was an action research framework. And these infographics represent how the AI was being used. And it was their very first foray, their very first opportunity to explore the use of generative AI in their classrooms. They captured the subject leader's perceptions and pedagogical reasoning, but also the co-design of the lessons or the curriculum materials that were implemented in their classrooms. And we think they will be really useful for other secondary school teachers and leaders in the field. So if we jump, I'll just zoom into each of them very quickly because there's a lot of information there. So we'll look first at health and physical education. It's just the next slide. Yeah. Okay, and so this curriculum, the teacher already explained, is highly personalised to really promote participation with social inquiry. So Gen AI was used here to create products that would become part of student knowledge development, so students could learn the content while applying it through conversations with Gen AI. The subject leader utilised the Gen AI to help with writing tasks that would shift focus much earlier in the learning process, to using higher order thinking skills of analysing and evaluating. And then to cater for this shift to students using AI, the assessment over on the right was forced to also shift, and the focus there became then on justification of how they used the AI and the changes that were made to completion of assessment. Okay, so I'll just talk briefly about each of them. Next was English and literature, and these are actually two different subjects. So there's English and literature as a higher ATAR school, maybe, more challenging subject. So this teacher decided it's fabulous to trial two different interventions. So you can see this is the learning cycle that he depicted there. And he thought in each of those classes, he would insert generative AI in different stages of their learning cycle. Both instances were to prompt critical thinking and to promote divergent thinking about different texts that they were exploring. And I say texts, but they're multimodal, multimedia type texts. So in English, it meant that they started with prompting in Gen AI, that's the part at the top, the pink circle at the top, using the Create framework. I'll say that again. In English, it means starting with prompting in Bing Chat to open up possible themes for discussion about the text. But in the literature subject, so it's the one down bottom right, that's where they inserted the Bing Chat. So they already had the inquiry, student-led research, and then they said, okay, we've explored general themes about this book. Now use prompting to diverge student thinking about those themes. And the Create framework is a prompting framework that they used for that. Then we'll jump into the language classroom. So this is the Spanish learning. How did you explain it before, Chiara? L2. Okay, so here co-design involved generating authentic texts. This is why I thought of a job advertisement for students to practice conversation in a written format. And the job advertisement had to be tailored to the student's language level in Spanish, and it was used to promote cultural exchange or engaging with that target culture. Very careful attention was given to the prompting design. So it had to align with the topic, had to align with the student's prior knowledge, and there were a lot of to and froing about, well, they haven't done this yet, and also the language requirements for assessment, such as verb tense relationships, verb tense alignment, that's a better word. And then lastly was mathematics, and yeah, you've revealed that math is my field of research, so I was most excited about this one to begin with, but this is the one who started saying, well, nothing's going to change in maths. If we have AI, what will be different? So the subject leader here, their overarching goal was to really assist students with evaluating and formulating problems. And in secondary mathematics here in Queensland, we have problem-solving modelling tasks, PSMTs, said that a million times previously. And so the focus of co-design was on formative assessment and creating these templated prompts to be included in unit planning for the whole maths teaching team, so that they could use it to generate feedback on student learning. But there was the dual focus because they also really wanted students to be able to generate the feedback for themselves, so to teach them through prompting templates for the teachers to get feedback, but students could then see those prompts and generate feedback for themselves. So in all four of those examples, what's interesting is I think we see a lot of focus on the work of assessment. So the teachers or subject leaders were all focused on how we're going to use the support, yes, learning and teaching, but assessment processes. They were crafting authentic assessment processes. They were promoting higher order thinking and creativity and trying to make assessment more interesting and relevant, or supporting them with success generally with assessment. And also it was to make tasks and student responses more interesting because, you know, if you're a secondary teacher and you're marking 100 assignments and they're all talking about the same theme, you're like, kill me now. So it was kind of like, if we can open up their thinking, boy, the assignments are going to be much more interesting to mark. So I think this offers a really rare glimpse into pedagogical reasoning and pedagogical decision-making. Well, for the 10 teachers, I've just shared 4 of the infographics today. It's that are subject specific and really grounded in classroom implementation. That's what's the exciting part for me. And in each instance, it's responding to their curriculum requirements and the school pedagogical frameworks and their students' needs, which was key. And it just showcases leader innovation because they're the ones who played with and explored and learned how generative AI good support teaching and learning in their faculty, but also in their classroom. Yeah, thank you. I think that should be about 6 minutes. Any questions? That was fun.
Thanks, Kim, so much.
Perfect.
All right, Vito, over to you. We're very excited to hear about this.
I'm Vito Candido. I'm a junior researcher at Prestridge University for Vocational Education and Training. And today I will present you an experimental study that we conducted in Zurich. And the idea was just teaching a procedure to students using VR. And the idea behind this study was that the demonstration-based training is very effective when you need to learn a procedure and demonstrate something from in real world is very effective. And we ask, okay, is it the same effective if we do it in VR, and especially if it is more effective than how a teacher usually teach this procedure. So we expected that looking at the procedure in VR will decrease the levels of cognitive load and this increasing the learning outcomes that the students have. We developed in collaboration with 2 teachers of the Zurich School for Chef students, and we developed an application in which we explain all the different procedure, and thanks to these 2 teachers, we had the possibility to access a 2 Michelin star restaurant to do the recordings. And it is not only because it is a nice place, as you can see, it is in this now, you see the lake, the mountains, and so on, but it is also because they do this process in the perfect way, and not all the students have the opportunity to do an internship in this environment. So there is a way to widespread good practices in doing a procedure. And the design of the study is quite simple. We have 2 different groups. One is in VR, and the other group received a traditional frontal lecture from the teacher, and they were also supported by a PowerPoint, as they usually do. And for measurement, we measure the levels of cognitive load, since the hypothesis is that they will find it easier. And we also measure the knowledge of the procedure. And to do this, we created a questionnaire with 10 multiple choice questions with 4 options to choose. And this was developed in collaboration with teacher. More or less, the collaboration lasted 1 year and some months, which was a long project. And I can show you the results. And here you can see that the results are confirmed our hypothesis. You can see that using VR decreased the level of intrinsic cognitive load, and the levels of intrinsic cognitive load is normally increasing the level of extraneous cognitive load that is decreasing the results of the test. I will try to explain it easier. The intrinsic cognitive load is the complexity, how much difficult do you perceive the task. The extraneous cognitive load is how good you feel that the instructions are provided in the lesson. So the higher is the level of extraneous cognitive load, the more you feel that the instructions are provided in a bad way. You need to spend a lot of your mental energy to understand how the information are organized rather than understanding the real learning material. On the other hand, intrinsic cognitive load is only a matter of how complex is the task, and it has an objective component and a subjective component. The objective component is how really difficult is the task, and it is dictated by the level of interactivity of the learning elements. If, for example, in math, you need to really have understood the one previous, how to do an equation to do the next step and do, I don't know, this equation or other mathematical task requires that you have a good understanding of the previous knowledge. And for the subjective complexity of the task, it is dictated by how expert you are in a task. And that's the reason why we also control for the previous knowledge of the students, because intrinsic load is strongly related to the previous knowledge of the students. So basically, they found it easier to understand the procedure and learn the procedure using the headset, and this provided us better learning outcomes. So what's new in this study? We know that, or we already know that PR is effective in teaching a procedure. The difference in this case is that it's not a computer-based PR, but it is a 360 video-based PR. So it is an omnidirectional camera that recorded all the procedure, and it is much easier and much faster to create a learning environment in immersive learning environment using this kind of tool. Yes, yeah, of course, this study has some limitation. For example, the test just tested the knowledge of the procedure, but did not test the real execution of the procedure. And both information are interesting, although the knowledge of the procedure is strongly related to the real execution, especially if the procedure did not require to do complex procedural tasks that require a good manuality or something like this. It's not required for the task that we teach. And for me, yes.
Wonderful. Any questions for Vito?
I have. Sorry, because I kind of missed it. Can you just quickly go over extrinsic and intrinsic cognitive load, and how did you measure them?
Yes, we maybe if we can
So you go back, yeah.
Yes, reported there. We measured it using Cleft scale. I've reported there only the Chromback alpha, that it is the reliability result for the cognitive load. It is a validated scale, and it is composed by 8 items: 2 for intrinsic cognitive load, 3 for the main cognitive load, that it is another component, and other 3 for the strength cognitive load.
Thank you.
But in each of those instances, the students are self-reporting.
It's self-report.
Yeah, and they're kind of saying, it's kind of evaluating like how good the instruction is and things like that.
Yes, it's for self-reporting measure, it's always a limit, because it's very hard for students to really understand, especially to distinguish between the two components, between intrinsic cognitive load and extraneous cognitive load. But at the moment, there's a paper written by Skolmowski in 2022, in which they try to define which is at the moment for the actual knowledge the best way to measure cognitive load. And they reported that self-reported measure at the moment are the best way. And if possible, in our case, what not possible, a combination of a physiological measure and self-reported measure, like in this case. But at the moment, physiological measures are not that accurate. They cannot distinguish the 3 different components of cognitive load accurately as you can do using this kind of test.
They came from same class, same cohort.
They were from 4 different classes, all at the first year, also in order to be sure that they did not have differences in previous knowledge. And they were all from the same type of class. Yes, they of course, if the best way to really control for the different classes to doing a multi-level controlling for the teacher instruction effect. What we did was to control for the teacher. So we control if there are any differences in the very first start between the different classes that had different teachers. So we have seen that we had some differences that could be related to the class. So we compared class 1, class 2, class 3, and checked whether is there any difference due to the teacher instruction, but we didn't find anything. It is reasonable also because this happened at the second month of their vocational school. So it is the teacher did not anything at the moment, just started the lessons.
Can I ask, so I have this clearly in my head, thank you very much for presenting. So the difference that the frontal lecture compared to the VR, so in the frontal lecture, was there any video used?
No.
Okay.
Only images and text, and the content had to be the same. Also, the time that they spent in the lesson to be the same on the video that they see in the VR headset, 20 minutes in both the cases. There are of course differences. For example, we did not ask the teacher to say exactly the same words,
Okay.
so it is not completely controlled. They can explain it as they usually do.
So VR group, is it self-directed learning or was there some teaching and teacher facilitation discussion?
No teacher facilitation. But yes. Yeah, and this is another difference. For example, in VR, you are self-paced. You can stop the recording. You have 20 minutes in any case. So, but you can stop the video if you go back and rewatch something if you are interested in really understanding something. There are several differences that you can have that are related only to the way in which the flow of information arrives. We already know that self-paced learning is more effective than not self-paced learning, but we also know that the possibility of, on the other hand, in the frontal lecture, they had the possibility to ask for clarification questions inside the 20 minutes. So in some way it is balanced, but once again, it's not an experimental study. It's not really controlled.
Yeah, did the students have previous exposure to learning with VR?
No, but they did a task of familiarization of about 5 minutes in which they learn how to use specifically that application. They basically walk around the restaurant and the hotel and beside the restaurant. We did a lot of photos and they learn how to. And we try to. Usually, when you wear an headset for the first time, there is a wow, you are very distracted. And we want that this is happening, not when they are learning. So when they said, okay, and they stopped saying, wow, after 5 minutes, more or less, we moved to okay, you can open the application now and start learning.
Well, that was exactly the thinking behind my question. I was wondering if, on the one hand, they may have felt a bit uncomfortable in the learning environment, but on the other hand, there may have been a novelty about the learning environment, which may even, I wonder if when you have novelty in the learning environment, actually can reduce cognitive load as well.
Yes, and this is absolutely true. There's a study by McCransky and Peterson, maybe, I'm not sure. McCransky and Peterson is sure. And in that study, they demonstrated that they had higher level of cognitive load, and they had to use some strategies to decrease the levels of cognitive load. But what we know by the theory of cognitive load is that if you strongly decrease the level of intrinsic cognitive load, so the task is very easy for you, then you do not feel this strenuous cognitive load. So if I ask you to do something very simple, can you move this bottle from here to here? The task is very simple. I can say it's very bad. I can provide you very bad instructions. It doesn't matter. You will do it the same. And that's basically what we think could have been happening in our health. It's easy. You just have to look.
Yes. I think it'd be very interesting to repeat that type of, if you could, experiment with the same group of students down the track. After that, had some greater exposure to VR as a way of learning to see what the results were then.
And after exposure to practical experience as well, like after the out in the field.
really interesting.
So is VR popular? Like, is it evident across vocational and in secondary schools? Is it becoming more common?
It's becoming more and more common, especially in German-speaking parts of Switzerland.
Okay.
In the Italian-speaking part, we are bringing it.
And in schools here in?
So not at our school at the moment. However, we've done some investigation and the potential use is very, very broad. So for example, we have a small farm at the school and it's actually VR software which can recreate all sorts of experiences on a farm for the students. So our agricultural science students will be able to basically be having experiences they would have on any farm anywhere. And then of course you have the vocational education that's software for that, so it can help students before they go into a workplace placement, for example.
Yeah.
So really our initial investigations into this found that there's a very, very broad application disciplines.
I couldn't name the school, but apparently there's a primary school on the north side where they've got about 10 headsets that they use for lessons as well. And they're using VR in across the curriculum areas there as well. So I thought, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Vieka had a section set up all about VR, and it really mentioned farming. I thought that's interesting because they connected the VRs with drones, and they were using the drones to round up the cattle. And it was talking about productivity and the farmers' use of time and resources. So I thought, they're even tying into different technologies there.
Oh, definitely it's over to you, Amy. And you're starting.
Very last one. So my topic is extended reality in STEM education. So in our study, we looked at how has extended reality technology has been utilized or conceptualized in the field of STEM education in different level, primary, secondary, and tertiary level. I just wanted to mention this is work done by our research team who has been teaching experience in primary, secondary, and tertiary level. So I just wanted to comment that. So our methodology, we approached with systemic quantitative literature review because before we develop anything, we wanted to see what's been out there. We use Prisma framework. If you're interested in like actual processes of it, I can tell you more about it later. We focused on the publication that's from 2016 and 2022. We chose the starting point as 2016 because lots of scholars mentioned that that's sort of like the point where virtual reality with the headset became very commercialized. It's became the point of explosion of that hype cycle of virtual reality. Total of 2,492 articles have been found, but we did have our screening processes. For example, instead of theoretical pieces, we really wanted to focus on empirical studies that's been reflected in the field of actual teaching. Also, we focused on publication that's mainly written in English. So in the end, we had 220 articles. So when I started getting interested in extended reality and all technology, I got really confused and puzzled about all this different terminology. So this is sort of the conceptualization that's reflected from our articles. So extended reality is sort of like the overarching umbrella term that's been used for this immersive technology, AR, augmented reality, MR, VR, and IVR. So for example, I will start from so extended reality, just basically immersive technology that allows human and machine interaction between real and virtual or combined environment. And if you could click the first one. So
Click this one.
yeah, just if you click it, there's animation will pop up. Yeah, so augmented reality. So if you have a real environment and if you're adding like digital overlay, such as like Facebook filter or Snapchat filter, that's basically augmented reality. But on the augmented reality, if you're adding the interaction with the real environment element, you click on it, Sarah, that's mixed reality. So HoloLens, and then they can actually move like floors and those digital element on the real environment. That's mixed reality. And then if you're removing that real environment aspect, it's totally virtual, then it's virtual reality.
So you're in.
Yeah,
space.
exactly.
Okay.
Like 3D video game. That's actually Zelda. My partner likes to play. So a lot of computer video game is virtual reality. Of course, different people use different conceptualization, but these are our conceptualization. And if you're using immersion using head-mounted device, like you see in front, I guess Vito brought it, that's immersive virtual reality. So that's IVR. And of course, maybe with new development, there's going to be another future innovation that will increase immersive experience within virtual environment. We don't know what that might look like, but maybe it's coming. So that's sort of our conceptualization of diverse technology, like extended reality technology. So in our article, we looked at various questions at what age level has this been adopted most, which discipline, which design element has been utilized, or what learning objective. But for time being, I'll just focus on learning affordance. What type of learning objective has been specifically addressed in the field of STEM education? So first one is visualization of abstract concepts, so such as molecular structures or electromagnetic field that students can often cannot see in real life with naked eyes. That has been utilized a lot. Second is to provide experiential learning opportunities, so such as virtual labs or something like Vito's doing, like skill set, doing fishing dissection, anatomy type of thing. Third one is to develop cognitive skills that's related to STEM education. So, for example, logical thinking, computational thinking, or spatial reasoning. Last one is just to boost students' motivation, engagement through like game design, creating a game, material, narrative, providing more compelling, contextualized learning environment. Okay, next please. So another just general key findings. Out of all this extended reality, augmented reality has been most widely adopted. I think it's because it's easily accessible than other technologies so far, followed by IVR and VR.
So that means augmented reality when you're in it.
Augmented reality is like just using the phone or iPad,
Okay,
things like that. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the most common.
That's
followed
most,
by the
yeah.
IVR,
That's
which
right.
is again
That's the immersive one.
the immersive.
Immersive one.
Okay, and VR.
Yeah.
This one.
That's right.
Okay.
And they all focused on providing that visualization of abstract concepts that's been mostly widely used in the STEM field. In terms, we didn't talk about design element too much, but there's a strong presence of sensory design element, especially visualizing with the results. And just as any other digital technology that's adopted in school setting, COVID fueled explosions in studies reflected in STEM articles too, spiking. It was only 35 articles in 2019, and it reached 305 in 2022. And ever since that, it's been only increasing. And what's next? We would like to do interviews with STEM educators and school leaders just to see current experiences of the immersive technologies in teaching. And as Kim and Sarah, our approach is very much co-design with teachers and school leaders in school, and I would like to follow that approach. So I would love to hear what your thoughts and what your current experiences are, any feedbacks. That's it. Thank you.
Historically, in sort of like the ed tech sort of kind of field I'm in, Amy, we looked at the difference between sort of being a user and a creator. Those two.
That's right.
Extreme. What is your thinking about this in this context?
How do I? Okay, so that's exactly the reason why I started doing this
there you
work.
go.
Because when I first purchased my immersive virtual programs, I was like, oh, there's been lots of product that's been out there for teachers, but a lot of them was like not developed with teachers. So I wanted to know how that's been actually utilized and how teachers actually use it and to what purpose, because we don't want to be another just shining tool, because a lot of this industry, they just put shiny, virtual lab, yada, yada, but what kind of learning actually happens with the technology, right? So to answer your question, where am I sitting? I think users can be creator or at least part of the creator. Maybe not for technical content, technical part, but at least for the content and experience design creator. So that I think that's why the transdisciplinary collaboration, that's where I am really interested in how industry, schools, and researchers can come together, create things together that's most effective for learning and creating environment for students. So that's sort of where I am. So yeah, and another, I didn't mention it. I've been contacted by First Nations group who's been actually offering STEAM like in-person workshop, but then they wanted to create virtual experience of that STEAM workshop. So I was like, well, if we're gonna do it, I need to know. Like we need to co-design together. So that's starting very soon. I'm heading to Sydney to witness what workshop they're doing in person, just to see if it's even possible, to be honest. So maybe it's not possible because some experiences are not to be replicated in virtual settings. So yeah.
I'm interested when you said the visualizations of abstract concepts, and I would have in the article, I'll have to have a look because I'd really love to see an example of that.
Yeah.
And then I think about what you just said, working with the Indigenous workshops. What would the visualizations of abstract concepts look
It's
like?
mostly chemistry or physics, like H2O molecules when they bond, what's happening there, or sometimes they use snowflake because you can, like, what does actually snowflake actually looks like, or in the physics, electromagnetic field, like they somehow make it visualize of electromagnetic field, things like that. Yeah.
Okay. And what did the literature say around current secondary schools or primary school uses? Because I'm really interested in how what's it saying so far?
So it's mostly used in tertiary level.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then primary is the least adopted.
Right.
And part of it is that a lot of teachers are not familiar with the technologies, and then they don't believe that some teachers don't believe that it's good for students at that age. So but there's been some case that primary students used it, and then they had good experience and good learning outcomes. So we will see. But I think, like you said, I guess it goes back to our research about risk and productivity and transformation. That needs to kind of, like, the transformation of paradigm shift and practice has to happen even before, because technology is out there. But I think it's that ultimately comes to the buy-in from the teachers. And secondary is growing in the STEM field mostly, but they don't use it for regular practice, more like one-time thing at the moment. But hopefully with the documented studies that it's actually helping students learn the concept, not just the motivation, engagement. Yeah. And hopefully if teachers are the designer, hopefully they can actually develop some program that could be more sustainable usage than just one-time thing.
Yeah, because it's often an expensive piece of equipment, isn't it? And you think, okay, if I've got 10, how are we going to manage that in a class of 30? So it all sort of becomes a complex way of redesigning, transforming my pedagogy, because when technology first came into classrooms, it was, well, I've only got one, how am I going to use that? What's that going to look like? And so we made labs.
That's right.
And we walked down the hallway to the lab so everyone could have their own. Yeah. And now we've gone back to classrooms, and now we've got BYO and all sorts of different things happening.
That's right.
So this, I'm sure, will become a bit more when teachers see the value of it, they want it. they want it in their classroom. They don't want it somewhere else where they have to go and get it.
That's right.
So it'll be an interesting. How do you see much of a shift? Have you seen?
So one of the collaboration that's starting was with the Centenary State High School, with the digital technology head of department. He has this virtual lab already set in, but that was it. He's like, how can I have a buy-in for my other teachers to use it? So how he's approaching it is in his digital technology grade 11 and 12, students need to develop a product. So he's one of the assessment is these are grade 11, 12 students. He's asking students to develop educational material that's followed by ACARA for grade 7 and 8 junior. But then hopefully like getting feedback from their teacher, so then they will actually get some introduction to, like my students are developing VR, and then their sort of students are leading the development through a co-design process with teachers. Very early engagement, and we're hoping to get actual industry partnerships so that it's sort of ready to use material, not
Yeah. I would like to focus on the word pedagogy, because I think that when developing VR application, it's very important to focus on the pedagogy behind. So most of the VR applications that I know, like present content, so expose students to a new learning environment, but in which students cannot be really active and interact with the environment and be constructive. Right. And so as following the ICAP theory of active learning, so they're exposed to a passive mode of engagement, so they just receive information. Is that according to the theory, students were more actively engaged with and interact with the learning material, their learning is more. So
so
Great question.
yeah, so I didn't mention about design elements. So when we looked at it, we looked at, hey, is it just providing the sensory, just visual, haptic, and audio, or is it actually providing narrative? Like, so for example, is there a story that they should follow, like game, or is there social element? Like, is it multi-user? We actually looked at if it was single user type, multi-user type too. If it's multi-user type, then they can actually interact in virtual reality platform, which, like you mentioned, they can interact with each other. Maybe they can have discussion, and they can, instead of just following the, video and just learning, it's more there's a social interaction going on. But then a lot, actually almost like 85% of current XR is focusing just on sensory, but a lot of immersive virtual reality is now incorporating that social element and narrative element. So hopefully we'll see. So hopefully that's why I really love to do work with educators and school leaders to see, hey, what kind of platform can we actually create that includes a multi-user type that's meeting the broad width with the school setting, broadband, or any school setting. We'll see. Yeah, hopefully I could design something with teachers and come up with some cool platform. That would be really cool, but maybe I'm being too ambitious. I don't know.
Never, always be ambitious. One, this is probably more of a statement and just your opinion on this, and including you, Vito, in this question. But a lot of this that we've talked about focuses on learning processes and engagement processes and cognitive load and, critical thinking. But often when it's used in classroom, it shifts to assessment. And this sort of dynamic has often always been around education technologies. I mean, education technologies has sat in a process bucket forever. How do I actually support learning? How do we actually get students engaging together? How do we actually get critical thinking going? But we seem to still have the shift to the assessment. Is it learning? How much did they get out of it? Sort of kind of thing. Do you see this changing in the way, how do you see that dynamic happening? It's really just
I don't know, Sarah. Yeah. It could be our collaborative research project. Yeah. I actually don't know. I don't have
Do you know what I mean? though?
Yeah, I know what you
Yeah,
mean.
because it's in the learning,
Yeah.
not in the assessment of
Assessment,
the learning. Vito, just.
It's not my studies from in which I work in. For example, a colleague of mine used it to assess how many, the number of defects that the students can find in a house that has to be rent. So basically, in the basic knowledge that the students have to learn in Switzerland, you need to know how to rent a house, which are defects that are inside the house, and they do the assessment using the VR headset, and they try to exploit, in this case, the affordances of being immersed in the real house, in the real house, and you can check at all the different problems in the house directly, and we have seen that we have better learning outcomes. It was not used for learning, just to check what you can
Oh,
see.
really?
Yes, because it's just an affordance issue. In the other case, they can see many photos of the house, and in the other case, they just have to look around. So it was more effective. It's just a case in which it works.
Now, any other questions of any of us here?
I was just thinking about with your example with the use of VR, and you picked a very didactic mode to compare against. Like it was very explicit. Here's a PowerPoint and I'm showing you, and then here's VR, and here you're immersed in it. And you highlighted then in yours about experiential learning. And I thought, yeah, that's probably closer to the experience, And then I wondered about theoretically how you put cognitive load, and I'm a constructivist, so that experiential learning, how you put those together, because you're asking, you're talking about cognitive load, but you also talked about the prior knowledge. Can you just remind me again about how you measured their previous knowledge of that?
Yes, they did the questionnaire when they started without any knowledge.
Could you say
Before starting looking at the learning materials and so on, they did the same question.
Okay. So they had to kind of explain how they would do it before. So you measured their previous knowledge in terms of quantitative score or something like that. Yeah. Yeah, I just see the experiential part in both of those as a connection. And I'm just always concerned cognitive load being put with that kind of conversation about previous knowledge.
Yes.
Just a comment. Yeah, you can respond to anyone.
That's it. Even with the experiential learning, like some of them will just focus on actually getting them to understand content, at least in STEM, or some of them will be actually specific to the skills and procedure. So,
how did you determine experiential learning then? Like, how did you?
For us, if they actually provide experiential learning, if they specifically mention it's to provide that experience, then we just categorize as experiential learning. Some articles have done all of it. Some of them are 2 or 3.
Another pedagogical approach that is often used with VR or AR headset is the simulation-based learning. So, for example, also for learning physics, chemistry, you can move with if you're looking at the magnetic field, you can move the magnet more on the right, more on the left, and look how it's changing. And so you're learning by simulating, okay, what if I do this? What if I do this? And you see how the formula, how the math works, and explains you what is happening. And it is in a way interesting.
Or your phase 2 or 3 of your study could be now 6 months later, you've had some practical experience. Let's do a VR 360 view and something's burning. What are you going to do? That kind of application. What will happen next? Choose your own adventure. Do you do this or this? Just thinking Bear Grylls. Yeah. That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn to the last slide and just ask two people in the room. One, I'm going to ask you, Sarojini, and because you're vocational education, and Ian, sorry, I'm going to put it on to you because thank you so much for coming as well. Ian. But that question, just all of these things, if you could maybe come up with one or two, just putting you on the spot, about any of these ideas we've discussed today in your educational context. What are you seeing in regard to how this might connect to secondary schooling for you, Ian?
I think for me, one thing that's not new is that the challenge of getting teachers to experiment with their pedagogy has always been a challenge, and it will continue to be a challenge even with these things here. So there will be a honeymoon period. There will be a new shiny sort of thing, whether it's AI or VR or whatever it is, but it's how we can actually get teachers to engage with technology in a way that actually changes student learning.
The transformation.
Do you want an answer to that? Assessment, right? It's so high stakes that if you're changing your pedagogy, you're risking, like you said, that connection before. Sorry, that's quite narrow and quick. Teacher perspective.
So you're saying that is getting in the way of teachers changing their pedagogy.
Yeah, because if you change your pedagogy, you're not confident what the outcomes. No one can say what's going to happen in your classroom. You know, every child's different. Your classroom setting's different. Whatever the subject you're studying means different things to different people. I already said I'm a constructivist anyway, but you're putting all of that at risk, and in a performative culture, that's high risk. Yeah, it's not a safe space.
I think that's right. I think that's the case. However, I would say that if you look at the teaching staff, then you've got a range of competencies from here to here on your teaching staff and experience. And some of the ones who are more confident and more experienced, and maybe just by the nature of their personalities as well, will not be as intimidated by failure, and they'll give things a go. And in fact, they're probably driven to remain engaged with the profession. That's one of their techniques, is they'd like to be experimental and try things. And then you have other people who I think are absolutely right, would be really
First years, early career teachers.
yeah, and not even just always early career teachers, sometimes people at the other end of the spectrum too. So I think there is a challenge when you have such a broad, teachers are not just teachers. Teachers are so many different people who do different things. As from a school's perspective, from a school leadership perspective, having students and teachers engage in technology, it's how do you bring that diverse group along.
Thank you.
I think there's a lot of leadership. I think a key word here is leadership. Teacher, classroom leadership, school leadership.
Because do you value then that teacher who's the experimenter in your school?
Sure.
Yeah. Would you say all principals do?
No, I think principals and schools different things they value in different amounts.
Yes.
So, Rajini, I think you want to say
Just one more yes, a way in which tool work, which we tried in Zurich, is to have pioneers, two teachers that works as pioneers, okay?
Yes.
And opens the road for the others,
Yes.
creating the application, then the others then just have to use it. It could be a way.
Well, isn't that Roger's diffusion model, diffusion of innovation, where you go with your, what are they called? The first one, the ones who go first.
The early
Adopters.
adopters.
Yeah. Remember that? Yeah. You go with the runners. Yeah.
And might work better.
So, Rajini.
Yeah, well, VR is now being used in vocational education, not in all areas, but in some areas. Affordability is a big issue.
Okay.
But from a pedagogical perspective, it's used more just to expose students to what the reality might look like, but it doesn't really get them to address the becoming part of what they are learning for. You know, for example, it's been used in trades. If I can give you one example that Vito showed me when I was at his university earlier this year on bricklaying.
Oh,
Yeah. So it, you know, the program allowed the viewers to pick up bricks and construct a wall in a certain way. So you could do it, but in vocational education, the actual becoming of a tradesperson or bricklayer or something is more than just understanding how it is done. So it is a good tool to use. And similarly, it's being used in hairdressing in some of the high risk occupational areas as well. So, but like in other areas, it's just started. And I want to make one comment, and just following up with your project about engaging teachers in vocational education. I think it's also very important to engage employers and also understanding those students who learn using VR. And the good thing is VR is only used as a tool at the moment, but not exclusively using VR without any teacher directions. But it will be good to see what employers think about and what their feedback would be to improve. That would be another project.
that's true. That's very interesting. Well, I'm going to bring this session to a close. I'd like to thank very much. Any questions? Yeah, online.
I have been monitoring us.
Thank you, Chiara and Vito, for coming today and presenting, and so early and in the rain and getting through the floods to get here. Very much appreciate, and it's really wonderful to hear what's happening in other parts of the world, and you can see that we're very enthusiastic, so we're happy to continue the collaborations and discussions.
And what a
with
beautiful
you.
part of the world.
I know, what a beautiful part. Thank you everyone for coming and spending the morning with us. We really appreciate it. Special thanks, Ian, for coming so far, and for Sarojini for creating this network together. But I'd like to draw it to a close today, and thank you again. Have a lovely day. Now, Did. What time's your flight? It's 11. So I have to run off. No, domestic. No, I've got, it's Udla. I'm Vice President of the Online Distance Learning Association Australia. It's our AGM tonight, and I'm leading the panel.
So panel day.
Big panel day. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, very much. And please have a pastry. We have lots of pastry.
Pastry with tea, coffee.
Yeah, we'll catch up.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. It's
Really,
you know,
appreciate
much
it.
more energizing.
Oh, you're right. And we in person. Yeah, a lot of things. Yes.